You never have enough.
I only have one, so, and I don't use it anymore. So,
Oh,
that's, one of the things for me when, I was having classes to play guitar. I always got so frustrated because I couldn't play what I wanted, and
yeah.
I kind of gave up. And, you as a teacher, what's the number one advice you give to your students not to give up playing?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, I think every day as a beginner, intermediate, actually, even as a advanced player, there's always that frustration that is below the surface. Sometimes it bubbles over, and you just feel like giving up. That's just human nature, I think, because as musicians, we have such strong desire to make music, and when we're somehow hindered from getting that to come out, it is really horrible. It's a horrible, frustrating feeling. So I think that one of the key elements that I used with really young students, 8, 9, 10 years old, as well as teenagers and people who are adults, was to make sure that we always focused on learning something every lesson that allowed them to play even the smallest part of their favorite songs.
Yeah.
And this is very difficult I find, with really young and really old students. The really young students, of course, they can't move their hands very well. They're not very developed. But if you can show them, just like a couple of notes of their favorite Metallica song or something, it really gets them excited and makes them feel good about their progress. They can show it to their friends, and it's a beginning.
Yeah.
And I think the difficult part with grown-ups is that it's really hard to get them to forget about all the negative alternatives, and to have that naive attitude of a young kid where the future is always bright, like
Yeah.
everything's going to be better in the future. Unfortunately, as you get older, that's really hard to maintain that attitude, but it's built into us as little kids. We never imagine the worst. We always imagine the future will be better. So,
Yeah.
but I know I practice every day. And so every day I'm reminded about what I can't do. I understand
Yeah.
you
And
completely.
during this pandemic, obviously there was trial times for everyone. And for you as a musician who's been making music for so long, was it hard to be creative and keeping the focus on making music?
Well, in many ways, it was easier because I was not distracted and extremely exhausted from touring. I've always found it almost impossible to write music while on tour because I put 100% of my energy into 2.5 hours on stage every night, and the rest of the day and the evening I'm recovering and walking around like a zombie on purpose because I want to save up the energy for those few moments on stage where I get to really deliver to the audience. Uh, and so I'm collecting ideas and I'm collecting feelings, but I'm not actually producing completed works. That really comes when I get home. I'm in a home studio or just hanging around with my instruments, and everybody else is away from me. I'm not being influenced by anybody. It's easier for me to come down to a level where I can really reflect on how I'm feeling about things. And that's when the real writing takes place. So during these unfortunate, uh, lockdown periods, I had the good fortune to be left alone to write a lot. And so it became a very productive period, not only for writing, but also for painting. So uh, I did feel like in many ways, like, it was my responsibility as a musician to create music for people. That is my job, you know.
Yeah.
I'm kind of powerless to stop the pandemic. You know, I got vaccinated and wore a mask everywhere, but I'm not a scientist,
Yeah.
not a politician, you know, and so my job was pretty clear. I had to write music for people so they could perhaps forget about this horrible tragedy that's you know, traveling around the globe. And so I got busy, and basically that's why we released Shapeshifting, even though we knew we weren't going to be able to
Yeah.
tour behind it. I just thought that it would be wrong to withhold it for business reasons, and
Yeah.
it would be better just to give it away. You know, essentially that's what we had to do because the business was so destroyed, you
Yeah.
know, by the calamity of the pandemic. Um, but we're more hopeful now. It seems like things are slowly opening up, and people are beginning to, you know, figure out how to get together and do concerts. There are still people who are canceling a lot because they're coming down with COVID. I
Yeah.
just saw Wolf Van Halen had to cancel. He just had maybe 2 more weeks of shows left.
Yeah.
So it's still happening, and it's devastating for the bands.
Yeah.
Uh, but hopefully that'll clear up in the next few months.
Yeah. And with the elephants on Mars, I was reading that one of the things, one of the focus, was not to have really boundaries when it came to the writing approach of it.
Yeah.
After making instrumental records for so many years, there's still boundaries.
Well, yeah, they're imaginary, right? All of them are. When it comes to creativity, you know, I should say, are our own worst enemies because we imagine that we can't do that or we can't do that, but actually we can do whatever we want when it comes to making music and art. So, but it isn't, you know, we are emotional beings. And so we create these boundaries and they feel real. Um, so, you know, you ask, I mean, it could be as simple as like, can I, you know, record this song that's so complicated no one will like it, but I do? Or can I put 3 ballads on my album, even though people can only stand one? You know, I mean, there are all these boundaries. You could just go on and on. Where if you sit down with a producer or an engineer, everybody can give you a reason not to do something. You know, like you want to record a distorted bass and they go, no, you really don't want to do that. Or you want to record something in stereo and they say, no, it won't work when they cut the LP because you're not allowed to have, you know, bass frequencies going back and forth on an LP. So it's got to be mono. And, you know, I always thought that once high definition, high fidelity streaming really came to fruition, all these things would go away. We wouldn't have to deal with these issues of old technology getting in the way of creating. And in a way, when I found myself at home recording at 96K and listening to everything in the best possible fidelity, I just thought, you know, I am going to proceed as if everybody in the world hears music like this, and I'm going to forget about certain boundaries. I'm not going to worry about if I want to play fast. I'm not going to worry that people might think I'm playing too many notes because I know that the other half of the population is going to think I didn't play enough. So, you know, at some point you just say, okay, just forget about everybody. I'm going to create my own goals and I'm going to meet those goals. Just going to write better, arrange better, play better, get better sounds, and make sure that every song sounds way more creative than anything I've ever put on any other album. And so those are the things that I focused on. I didn't let anything else interfere.
Yeah. And you talked about high fidelity. I sign up to Apple Music because now they have the Dolby Atmos format. Tidal as something like that as well. Does that open for you, as a musician, as a composer, does that open up the creative realms, so to say? Because, I love like watching a movie. I love to go to the cinema, but if I'm home, I have a Dolby Atmos, speakers and all that stuff because I love listen to the stuff the best way possible. I'm a bit of a freak for the best sound possible. But for you as a musician and as a composer, does that open those creative boundaries to write?
Well, it's twofold. Um, I'm happy to hear that you're into the Atmos thing, because we're actually making an Atmos mix for Surfing with the Alien right now. So I know, I'm very excited about that. That's really great. And so we're always looking ahead into the future that way. However, I often tell myself, when I'm writing, that I really have to step away from the sonics and the technicality of it, of what I'm working on, and see if it survives in its simplest form. So, I'll take a song that maybe has 6 keyboards, 7 string guitars, banjos and loops and exotic percussion, and I'll just go and I'll play it on a ukulele, and I'll hum the melody, and I'll go, is this actually working? Is this a strong melody? Is the harmony unique? Do they go together really well? is the basic rhythm, does it feel good? And if I can't prove to myself that it works on the ukulele or on the piano or acoustic guitar, then I know I'm not done yet. I'm not done working on it. Because you can always take a song, even if it's a crummy song, and you can make it sound interesting on Atmos, right?
Yeah.
You just make things move around, and you use some interesting sounding textures, but the song itself may not be good. So if your goal is to titillate, the listener, there are places to go for it. But if you're trying to tell a story with melody and harmony, then you really do have to push that stuff aside first.
Yeah.
Write a great song first, and then reach out to some creative mixers and collaborate with them to create a really good, whatever it be, mono, stereo, 5171, and now Atmos.
Yeah. And the Surfing with the Alien mix, when do you expect that to be available on the platforms?
We're trying to meet a deadline right now that would allow it to get into Sony's release catalog in June, I think. And that's just the last few days it's been coming together. I think we have one song mixed. There's only 10 songs on the album, so it should go pretty quickly.
Yeah. You still have the tapes from the original recordings with all the individual
Of course,
tracks?
yes, yeah. The sad thing about tape is that it doesn't last very long.
Yeah.
Every batch of tape that was made, every reel has its own unique lifespan, and you really don't know. It's like when you go to the market and you're picking up avocados, you're not quite sure what's inside, right? I mean, you can look at the outside, but there's sort of green, and it's always kind of a surprise, whether it's in perfect shape or not. So with all the albums that we made many years ago, we did judicious transfers at 96K, and every 5 years we upgrade all of the copies of everything. The Surfing with the Alien, of course, those tapes are from 1987. They've had to be baked in the oven and very carefully transferred. So I doubt you could play that tape again.
Yeah.
The multi, I don't, so they're saved and they're safe, but I don't think anybody wants to play them because they may just fall apart all of a sudden.
And it's funny you talked about breaking the tape, because probably younger generation are not aware that when you're talking about breaking the tape, you really mean it.
You really mean it. I know. You just got to put it in the oven. Sometimes I think the last time it took 8 hours to bake the tape, because it's a piece of like plastic, like a mylar kind of material, and it's got iron oxide on there. And I know it sounds like science fiction, but somehow music is on those particles, but those particles fall off the tape.
Yeah.
And something that people don't realize is that every time that you play a multi-track tape on a tape recorder, it gets darker and darker, because the particles that retain the high frequencies slowly fall off every time the tape is going past the record and the play heads. And so there was always this fear that if you kept working on an album, that it would just get darker and darker, and then it would sound like this. And you can't go back. So it's so many problems with tape, and although there were some great things that happened with it, and of course it's analog, and no ones and zeros, and so that sort of is something that we find very pleasing, our ears and our minds, when we hear music coming off a tape recorder. I wish, to tell you the truth, I wish I could have had every fan come into the studio at Hyde Street and listen to Surfing with the Alien on the multi-tracks the way I did.
Yeah.
Because nothing can beat that. When you're in a studio designed to be absolutely acoustically perfect, and you've got the best gear, millions of dollars of gear, and you're playing back this thing before it ever goes and gets squished on a piece of plastic, that's the greatest listening experience ever. And that's always the saddest part about finishing a record, is you realize you'll never hear it like that again.
And technology obviously has evolved. You probably use Pro Tools or the Steinberg,
Yeah.
whatever software people use these days. You have amps. We talked about that they are behind you, but with technology and plugins, there's a new world and probably a cheaper way to to make things. Do you like to mix both worlds? Are you still pretty much old school when it comes to that? Plug the guitar in the amp and go for it.
Yeah, well, every day that's how I play. I just plug into one of those things. Usually it's my signature Marshall. I spend, if not 1 hour, maybe 6 hours, just playing against my own tracks. Let's say rehearsing for a tour, or just trying to teach myself something new that feels awkward or something like that. So that's my reality on a daily level. I do love recording digitally because it's so much like composing on manuscript paper. It's non-destructive. You can create 100 arrangements. None of them will ruin the recording.
Yeah.
You can just edit and edit and edit, and it always sounds perfect, which is really great. You can't do that on tape. And I know, because I've made many albums on tape, and it's a nightmare, an anxiety-ridden experience when the razor blade comes out and you want to try to get rid of a verse or something, because you can never go back, really, So I'll tell you, this new album is a good example to enlighten you to how we work, and it really answers your question. The guitar sounds on the album were all made with the Sansan plugin, which is a very old plugin that Avid made back in the 90s. It wasn't my intention to do that. I thought, as we recorded the album, that when we went to mix it, the pandemic would be over, we'd be in a studio, we would reamp everything and mic it up, and it would sound like everybody else. But this time around, of course, that never happened. And although I generated reamped guitar performances, and I used modeling suites, and in the end, every time we went to a song, the tracks that we chose, because they sounded the best, were the ones where I used the Sansan plugin. Now, when Greg went to mix the album with Eric, they took those performances I had done, they took them out of Pro Tools, put them into $50,000 Fairchild limiter compressors, Les Paul's very own LA2A. I mean, just like the greatest holy grail collection of analog tube limiters and compressors and EQs, and then sent it back into Pro Tools. So the plugin benefited from some very expensive analog gear, but the end result was that the guitar performances sounded more like me, and I think that's what I was looking for. I was trying to somehow record my personality in a more compelling way, rather than trying to make me sound like typical guitar player, like shredder guy, rock and roll guy, whatever. That's what I started to notice, was that the plugin did not homogenize me to sound like your average rock guitarist.
Yeah.
you know, and there's a lot of us around because, you know, rock and roll is kind of an old style. And so there's so much recorded material of guys plugging into Marshalls or Fenders. And so when you hear it, you just go, oh, I know that. That's just, you know, typical guy,
Yeah.
65 guy playing his guitar through a loud amp, you know? So this was a way to like get rid of all that and say, no, I want the listener to be like right there by my fingertips. I want them to hear me. I don't want them to hear Marshall PV Fender. I want them to hear me. And that was a revelation for me because I didn't go into the album thinking that's what we were going to do. I was really shocked that every song, that the Sans amp was the track that sounded the best.
Yeah. And bringing that to the live setting, do you have to make adjustments to the sound? How does because obviously you have a unique sound on the record. Mm-hmm. So how are you going to reproduce that, in a way with the other songs that you've played over the years that all have to sound, in a certain way. So how are you going to do that?
Well, a lot of it is really straight ahead. I wound up using very few pedals on this album. They're still actually on the floor right to my left here, but, wah-wah pedal, the sub and up pedal, micro Qtron, the Octavia pedal. Those are the only pedals I used. I think we added some flanging and reverb and delay in mix plugins. Those are all normal things that I would set up with. I think the main attraction here for me with the Sans amp was that it felt, believe it or not, more like my signature Marshall than anything else, but it sounded more present. And that's the kind of thing that you can only get when you turn your amp up really loud.
Yeah.
And so only in a studio or a large venue are you going to get your Marshall amp up to 110 dB. And that's where the design of the amp really kicks in, and you get this extra presence and power and fidelity because the power section of the amps are really creating a sound that you only get once they're pushed to deliver that amount of decibel level. And for most people, you can't do that in your house, your apartment, and most small clubs, you can never turn up that loud. So, fortunately for me, when I play mostly theaters or larger venues, I can always play at that level. So my experience playing live is with that setup it makes me feel very comfortable. Like I can play Satch Boogie or the Elephants of Mars. I can play Sahara or Flying in a Blue Dream, and they're very much the same. They're really within my technological woodshed. It's like all the tools are really there. Just have to manipulate the volume control and play with the gain a little bit. So it's not that different.
Yeah. You don't like to play with in-ears? A lot of...
I hate that. No, I really hate that. Couple of reasons. Number one, I manipulate the sustain of the guitar by proximity effect. So I have to get rid of this little message here. Hold on a second. Okay, thank you. By proximity effect. So I've got my amps behind me, 4x12 cabinets, and I have monitors placed around the stage. It's very old school, and they're really loud. Like if you walked on stage in the middle of a show, you'd be like, "Oh my God, too much Joe," But I'm using that sort of field. I'm creating an environment where I can turn left to right, and I can get different kinds of sustain. And it allows me to really hear the sound of my touch, because that's what I'm playing with. Yeah. I'm really manipulating finer elements of performance in order to, convey the meaning of the song to the audience, So that's that part of it to me is essential. And also getting positive feedback is also impossible. You can't hold your guitar up to your in-ears to do that. And the other thing is I hate in-ears because you can't get away from the sound.
Yeah.
Like if I need to hear more hi-hat, I just walk over to the drums, you know what I mean? If I'm trying to get away from the bass, I can just step back and head towards my amps. And sometimes there are parts of songs where you do need to hear somebody else really quickly,
Yeah.
and you can't be like sending signals to the monitor guy. That doesn't work. So what I do like to do, which I know is really weird, is when I go to a sound check, I get my sound together. And then once I know that everything sounds right, I put in these really thick foam earplugs that I've worn for over 30 years. And so, it takes about 30 seconds, but my brain then orients itself to understanding what this muffled thing is that I'm hearing. And I get to play the whole show. And then when I come off stage, I can still hear the birds chirping in the morning because I've been wearing ear protection.
Yeah, I was asking that because I've seen it on the club. Some bands, they play now with all digital amps and effects and all that, and they have in ears. But for us that are in the front, not having amps, it's weird because I couldn't hear guitars. Was like a freaking karaoke thing because I just could hear the singer singing because it was in front of me. Like the guitars were very like thin and just on the sides. I could barely hear it. I was like, this is weird. I need the amps there. I need something because it just was so strange experience really. If it's a small club, if you play with just digital stuff, forget about it. It won't be good for the crowd.
Yeah, there are some bands that they can't. If you're playing with Dua Lipa or something like that. I mean, it's so complicated what they're doing. They're putting on a show. It's tied to computers. Everybody has to hear all the count-ins and the cues and whatnot. So I get that. And then if you're, when I'm thinking about Tosin in Animals as Leaders, I mean, they've got to be totally. They have to hear everything that the three of them are doing because they're doing something that's at such a high technical level.
Yeah.
That I totally get what they're, and they create this beautiful thing. It's so unique. But for others, it's a completely different form of entertainment. I think that's really what it is. That's what you're saying is that, if that's if you're in a stadium and you're watching Animals as Leaders, it'll be fine because you're so far away from them, but you're hearing all the PA and it'll sound brilliant. But if you're in a small club, you just might hear Matt's drums and you'd be going like, well, where are the guitars?
Where is the sound? And
Yeah.
it's been 25 years since the Satriani Vi Johnson, the original, I think, G3 tour. Steve Vai on Twitter, he said he's up for a reunion. Would you be up for a reunion with G3 with that original, three guys?
Oh yeah. We've been talking about it. We've done a few interviews together recently, and it's been really nice to, first of all, to hear this great music that they're putting out. Eric's putting out 2 records pretty soon that are really just like perfectly Eric, and of course Steve's album is mind blowing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be great for the three of us to be able to go out, not only because it would be a nice reunion, but because we have all this new music to play for people, and it's so different. Yeah. The three of us are still incredibly different, and that would be so entertaining,
Yeah, and just to wrap it up, you've heard the news of Deep Purple. Steve Morse, had to sit out of the tour because his wife, had some health issues. Simon McBride is stepping up. How was your experience with obviously you're more of an instrumental guy, and being in a band like Deep Purple where we had John Lord, playing the keyboards was like a fucking genius. I love John Lord's sound. Yeah. What is the main challenge playing in a band where there's more than just you in a way, so to say, playing where there's, You have Ian Gillan, you have Roger Glover, you have Ian Pace, you have John Lord. What was the challenge, finding your place there in Deep Purple?
It's always a challenge when you're playing with a large band, but it's a relief compared to what I do. I mean, when I hit the stage in a Joe Satriani show, I am responsible for all of it. you know, I play the intro riff and the melody and all the solos and the melody and the outro solo, and I've got to look at people and talk to people. And so, whether it was me playing with Jagger or Chickenfoot or Deep Purple, it was, primarily it was a relief because I could take 3 steps back and hang out by the drummer. I could sit there and just groove with Chad Smith and not worry about, entertaining the front rows. That was Sammy's job. And with Deep Purple, it was the same. I was replacing someone that's irreplaceable, so I didn't even bother trying to be like Richie. But I was really happy to hang out with Ian Pace, and just listen to John Lord. That was great. You have to learn how to stay out of the way, when some other band member is taking the spotlight. So you learn that part of the arrangement. Some bands are a little crazier than others. When I was playing with Jagger, I mean, there were so many people doing so many things that you really did coast quite a bit until it was your moment, and then you really had to shine. But it was sort of the style of music didn't require that that you simply explode like with Deep Purple, because Richie set the standard for how solos would come out. You really did have to come out with a lot of personality and technique. Whereas with Mick Jagger, it was a little bit more relaxed. It was an older style of rock and roll. Solos still kind of fit in with the band rather than standing out front. And Chickenfoot was just a free for all. It was always a free for all because everyone's just going for it. So the live performances of Chickenfoot were just like, hold on, like fasten your seatbelt and just hold on, because every beat might be in a different place, and that was just the way that we decided to play. We hadn't really discussed it. It just happened that way. We weren't like a super tight band. We were kind of a crazy band.
Yeah.
And so, however, the coolest thing about playing with Deep Purple was that they sounded so good every night, and they played so well every night. It was the easiest thing to fit in because of who they were as musicians, how accepting they were that this guy from New York playing an entirely different guitar with an entirely different sound would be allowed to come in and play with them. And it was pretty remarkable. They were very accepting of my eccentricity, as a guitar player, and had never pressured me to play like Richie in any way.
Yeah.
So, and that's great. And I think that's why Steve Morse worked out so well, because Steve Morse had so much to bring to them, and they just, they were happy to accept this new American guitar player into their fold, and to help keep Deep Purple moving forward.
Yeah, and he had that old school vibe as well to it. So, with Dixie Drags, great work that he did with Dixie Drags. I love his work there. So,
Yeah, and we've toured. We've done G3 tours together. Steve is just a remarkable musician, great guitarist, really wonderful human being as well, and great improviser. We had just fantastic times on tour. So
yeah, and to wrap it up, you have a European tour for next year. No Portugal. What's happening? Who do we need to annoy to bring you back to Portugal?
Yes, I know. Part of that, booking a tour, I don't know how the agents do it, but there's competition for venues, which is the problem that we've had as the world is starting to open up. Everybody wants to tour. And so when you go to say, hey, I want to play Lisbon, I'm available this month, very often the promoters say, well, there's no room. like every night is booked, and there's 100 bands that are waiting to take over if somebody cancels,
Yeah.
And so we've been standing in line like everybody else, to try to get into these venues. Luckily, we were able to get about 95% of every venue that we booked in 2019 to keep the date and the venue and honor the tickets that had been sold the last few years. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we couldn't play everywhere, and the conflict in the Ukraine has also had a really bad effect on many countries that we were planning on going to, but now cannot. So, yeah, between the pandemic and the war, it's a very difficult situation still.
Yeah. Joe, thank you very much for your time. I cannot tell you how big of a pleasure it was to talk to you. It's been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. And, I look forward for the Dolby Atmos mix of Surfing with the Alien. You make me very happy to know that.
Yeah, me too.
All right, Joe, thank you very much. I hope to see you soon anyway. So festival or, proper tour in a couple of years, maybe, who knows. I look forward to see you. Thank you very much. Elephants on Mars, it's a great record as always. You cannot do any wrong. Even if you try to play bad, I'm sure you cannot do that.
I'm going to keep your word on that one.
All right, Joe, thank you very much. Have a great day. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.